AllBearcats.com and Sports Illustrated reporter Russ Heltman is back. We're going to talk all things on what could be or what's poised to be a historic week for the Cincinnati Bearcats in the NFL draft. Potentially 9 Bearcats will hear their name called, and Russ is here to break it all down here on today's episode of Locked On Bearcats.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. He's back once again. He's the AllBearcats.com. He's a reporter for them and for Sports Illustrated. He's also a producer and host in the city of Cincinnati on 89.3. He is Russ Heltman. Russ, good to have you back. This is going to be a historic week for the Cincinnati Bearcats football program. We're going to have a first-round draft pick today. Today is the day, Russ. And to all of you listening, happy draft day. And it's going to be not only a great night tonight, but a great weekend in Vegas. 9 Bearcats potentially are going to hear their name called. Russ, just how historic of a weekend is this going to be for the Cincinnati Bearcats football program?
Alex, great to be with you once again here on Locked On Bearcats. It's the biggest weekend in program history, and I would say it's even bigger than the college football playoff weekend. Why? Because of the amount of talent that will see these players enter the NFL and the high school ranks, the amount of talent on the current roster on the Bearcats that will see their former teammates enter the NFL ranks, and the fact that they're going to not only set a program record for players drafted in one single draft, but they're going to shatter that record, Alex. They might beat it by 33%, or they might beat it by 50% in terms of getting 9 Bearcats drafted if our guy, defensive lineman Curtis Brooks, can sneak in there in the 7th round. So to me, this is the biggest weekend in the history of the program, and by far the biggest weekend since Luke Fickell has taken over the reins of this team. The best players in the country go to the biggest schools because they want to A, make it to the NFL, and B, win national titles. It's in that order. It's all about getting to the professional ranks, and the biggest stars in high school over the next 5 to 7 years are going to get a real clear taste of what the Cincinnati coaching staff can do for their own game on tonight. We're getting there. We're a few hours away from the opening picks there on the Strip in Vegas.
So you're saying this is a bigger weekend than when Luke Fickell took the job at Cincinnati? Are you saying it's a bigger weekend than the college football playoff, too?
I am. I do. I think it's bigger. Honestly, I think this is the biggest weekend in the history of the program. This is the defining weekend of this class that Luke Fickell poured his heart and soul into. It was the foundation of this entire program, and I think this is the springboard weekend where you can start to see, and there are guys in the transfer portal right now, many a guy in that used to wear scarlet and gray up there in Columbus that are in the transfer portal. All of this matters. All of the optics matter here, and I think the national stage that all of these Bearcats will be on throughout the weekend makes it more impactful, I think, than one 3-hour game where you lose to Alabama and you don't quite look as good, go out for them. Many expected you to perform. Be another kind of fly in the ear of Alabama, just a little annoyance. But they're not an annoyance this weekend. They're going to take center stage and have, I would guess, it'd be in the top 5, maybe the top 3 of schools with the most draft picks from their single program this weekend. They'll be right up there with Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, all those teams that perennially make the college football playoff and perennially put their talent in the NFL at a high rate.
Yeah, I'm looking at Dane Brugler's draft guide, The Beast, and in his top 100, there are 5 Bearcats listed. That is more than the team the Bearcats played in the college football playoff, Russ, in Alabama. I mean, that's just another testament as to how talented this Bearcats team was in 2021. And I told Bearcats fans on this show on Monday, appreciate this because, and I think it's going to happen again, but this is the first time, Russ, that it's happened.
Right. It's never going to feel sweeter than this moment. And I hope Bearcats fans kind of celebrate this weekend like they celebrated the college football playoff run. That's what I think it deserves, because it matters so much. The amount of players you can get in the NFL, the amount of players you can get drafted, and the amount of players that you can get drafted in the opening 3 rounds. I'm glad you put up the top 100 aspect of that, Alex, because it's not like years past. Sure, there have been some classes where the Bearcats have put 4 or 5 players in the NFL, but it starts in the 3rd round, starts in the late 3rd round, starts in the 4th round. There is premier talent, 5 of them, 5 premier talents that are going to go in the top 100 picks, top 130 picks, give or take, with Darian Beavers kind of hovering around that area. So when you look at the fact that the Bearcats are not only putting a ton of players in the league, but they are showcasing their development by placing those players on teams and in draft slots in the first 90, 120 picks, that's just goes back to my point, why this is such an important weekend for Cincinnati, because never before have recruits across the country, as UC gets set to enter the Big 12 in less than 18 months, seen a Bearcats football program be able to put multiple top 3, top 4 round talents on NFL rosters.
It's that adage I said when you were on here last week, Russ. Timing is everything. UC gets a bid to the Big 12 the same year that they have their greatest season in program history, their most successful season, getting to the college football playoff, the championship playoff in college football, a place where the Bearcats had never been prior to last year. So we know, Russ, or we think at least, that Sauce Gardner is going to be, I think for sure, a top 10 pick, possibly a top 5 pick, maybe even top 3 or 2. But what about Desmond Ridder? Is he a first-round pick in your eyes?
Yes, Desmond Ridder is a first-round pick in my eyes. Going through all the quarterback evaluations that I've done independently, I don't really get it. I don't get how Desmond Ridder is not the bona fide number 1 quarterback in this class. He has the winning. He has the development. He has the talent. He has the moxie. He has everything. And then when people bring up, oh, he is not as accurate as other people, I don't see any difference in his accuracy as guys like Kenny Pickett, guys like Malik Willis, guys like Matt Corral. None of these players, his peers in this draft class. Now, I'm not talking about other draft classes. Like last year, I would probably put Ridder in the 4th, 5th slot, hovering right there with around Zach Wilson and Mac Jones. But in this class, with how little talent is in the quarterback playing field right now, I think he's the top quarterback available. Now, do I think he will get drafted in the 1st round? I'm going to say no. I do not think he will get drafted in the 1st round. I think teams will be willing to see if he falls past that 1st round slot. I'm eyeing maybe the Falcons with their 2nd round pick. I think it's a 38 or 39, something like that. And then the Seahawks sitting there at number 40. Those are the 2 teams I would have a real key eye on if Ridder does get past the 1st round. So no, I don't think he will be a 1st round pick. I do think he should be a 1st round pick because of the way he's developed, the way he has led this program from the ashes to the mountaintop, and the way he has performed. He is the greatest quarterback, not only in UC history, but arguably in AAC history. He holds all of those records. He's done it in an efficient manner at that. He has the athleticism that you kind of need from guys that are lacking with their accuracy a little bit. And I think he has the work ethic of a guy like Josh Allen, who I compared to David Garrard 5 years ago coming out. I had no hope that Josh Allen was going to be a successful NFL quarterback because he has the accuracy issues, which he still has. And that's the key thing here for Desmond Ridder. He needs to go to a perfect situation like Josh Allen did. Do we think Josh Allen would be playing this well without Stephon Diggs and the rest of the weapons that Brandon Beane, the GM at Buffalo, put around him? Do we think it's a coincidence that Josh Allen's completion rate went up 9% compared to the year he got Stephon Diggs compared to the year before when he did not have Stephon Diggs? It's not a coincidence. You need to be surrounded by great players. Desmond Ridder, I think if he is surrounded by premier receiving talent, i.e. what they have with the 2-headed monster and Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf in Seattle, he could be a bona fide starting caliber quarterback, top 20 at least quarterback in his rookie year, and has a ceiling, I would put it around 12th to 10th best quarterback in the NFL. I don't know that one day he could be a top 5 guy, but I do feel strongly I will put it as factual that he will be a starting caliber player at the quarterback position. And that's usually worth a 1st round pick. But I think in this draft, with how much defensive talent is there and how willing teams are to kind of wait on the quarterbacks in this scenario with the talent level there, I don't think he will be a 1st round pick, but should.
I think you bring up a great point in a comparison, Russ. Ridder to Josh Allen. I've compared him to him as well. And I'm going to ask you about that here in just a second. But I got to tell our listeners first here about betonline.net because it is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Time for a big announcement as we thank you for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. For the first time ever, Locked On is hosting live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft from our studios in Dallas with pick-by-pick analysis from our local team experts and draft gurus. Tune in all 3 days as our draft team guides you through every pick and every trade in real time. It all starts on Thursday, April 28th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, available on the Locked On NFL YouTube channel and the Odyssey app. Russ Heltman, my guest here on Locked On Bearcats today. He's, of course, a reporter for AllBearcats.com and Sports Illustrated. He's also a producer and host on WMKV 89.3 in Cincinnati. I said it right this time, thank goodness. So Russ compared Desmond Ridder to Josh Allen in terms of the accuracy issues that you cited coming out of college. Both quarterbacks had that. And I'll answer your questions because I was out on Josh Allen after his rookie season in 2018. I'm like, 52%, not going to get it done. So then the next year, the Bills kind of ease him along. They have a run game that's really solid. Their defense was really good. They got to the playoffs. Josh Allen's completion percentage, I think, was around 59-60. But then, as you cited, you bring in Stephon Diggs, you bring in Cole Beasley, and next thing you know, his completion percentage is up near 70. He's an MVP candidate the last 2 years. So, and I think about, okay, if Desmond Ridder can go to a situation where there's great receivers and perhaps a good running game, which I think the Bills have a capable running game with Josh Allen. So you mentioned
Josh
Atlanta,
Allen
Seattle.
is the running game for Buffalo.
Well, okay, that's also true. And you think about this, Russ. Desmond Ridder can run. He can make plays with his legs. That's why he reminds me so much of Josh Allen. And Ridder, I think his arm is better than some might think. So you mentioned Atlanta, Seattle. Is there any other landing spot that you think would be ideal for Ridder?
Well, the number one landing spot and one that would pain my all Bengals heart here is the Steelers. The Steelers are the bona fide number one situation for Desmond Ridder to go to, in my opinion. They draft receivers very, very well. They already have established receivers there for him to throw to in Claypool and who's the guy from Toledo? I'm completely forgetting. I completely forget who their other receiver is. But the fact that there are decent receivers there right now already established.
Ray McLeod?
And no, not Ray McLeod. I'll come to it when you're talking next. I'll bring it back up. But the fact that they're there, you have a coach like Mike Tomlin who's entrenched. You have a very stable organization. The only downside going in is Desmond Ridder would likely be the worst quarterback in his division for years to come. It's going to be hard for him to get above Deshaun Watson, above Joe Burrow, above Lamar Jackson. That's the one downside you have. But other than that, there are no – Deontay Johnson is who I was thinking of.
That's who it is, yeah.
Yeah. There are no real negatives on the Pittsburgh end. Yeah, they still need to shore up that offensive line, but I'm sure that they will start to do that in this draft and attack that a little bit more heavily. So I think Pittsburgh's the number one team, the best landing spot for Desmond Ridder, and I don't think it's particularly close. You'd probably have Seattle right behind them, but I put that roster probably a tier below the Pittsburgh roster right now when you compare the defensive side of the ball on those two things, and I would still put Seattle's offensive line a little bit worse than Pittsburgh's offensive line. So when you think about the contributing factors surrounding Desmond Ridder and wanting him to be in the best environment possible, you got to look towards the Steel City.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how would you feel as a Bengals fan, which both of us are, as a Bearcats fan, which both of us are, you covered the team, You're from Cincinnati. I'm from Cincinnati. How would you feel if Desmond Ridder, after all these 4 years, he goes to Pittsburgh?
I'd honestly love it because I respect Desmond Ridder. I know what he brings to the table, but like I said, he is not any of those other three guys. And that's just the bottom line. I don't even think I need to expand on that. He is not those other three players.
That's a good point, and I never thought about it that way. So that leads me to this, and I had someone on this show.
What it would do, Alex, is it would affirm for all AFC North fans that the Pittsburgh Steelers have the worst quarterback in the division, and it would be hard. It would be surprising to say the least if that fact ever changed with Desmond Ridder at the helm.
Do you think he could beat Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky in the quarterback battle if he gets drafted by them?
I think he would, yes. And if you're the Steelers, you're 1,000% praying that he is able to beat out Mitch Trubisky and our guy Mason Rudolph. Mitch Trubisky, I mean, no more lipstick has been put on a pig more over the last year than Mitch Trubisky. The guy is just a massive glow up riding the bench in Buffalo. It's amazing.
So I had a guest on earlier this week who said to me, she is the host of Locked On LSU. She's also a sports talk show host in Nashville, Caroline Fenton. She mentioned to me that the Tennessee Titans might be interested in drafting a quarterback. The Tennessee and Ridder may be interested in playing for them. Is that a good landing spot for Desmond Ridder?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Alex, because that was my little wild card. Don't be surprised if he goes to your team. When I was on with our friend James Rapine on ESPN 1530 about 10 days ago, I think that's a definite possibility. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, once again, if you're the Tennessee Titans, looking at this draft class, these core QB classes, are we capping ourselves out with a player that could maybe barely be better than Ryan Tannehill, but isn't going to go into a divisional playoff round game against Joe Burrow and be able to go toe-to-toe with them? That's the question you have to ask yourself if you're the Tennessee Titans. And a player in Desmond Ridder who has been on record over the past month saying in conversations with other teams that he is comparing himself to Ryan Tannehill and Marcus Mariota. Now, if I were Desmond Ridder, I would be picking much better comps to compare myself with than Ryan Tannehill and Marcus Mariota, considering how little they have accomplished in their careers. Ryan Tannehill's kind of crazy, outrageous contract notwithstanding, good for him for earning that. But we know what those players are. They have a serious ceiling on their games. And the question you have to ask yourself, if you're Mike Vrabel, best friend of Luke Fickell, best man, part of their wedding parties, each of them, and you have to look at your coaching staff and your evaluation staff and say, can Desmond Ridder enter that tier 1, high tier 2 status of quarterback that we know Ryan Tannehill can't get to? Or are we better off getting another weapon for Ryan Tannehill with that 26th pick, I believe they have, and trying to surround him more and help him out there when you know that Ryan Tannehill is going to be a high-end tier 3 quarterback to middle-of-the-road tier 2 quarterback? And that's the kind of difference you have to figure out if it's actually there and if it's actually worth pursuing that difference with a premier pick. If you're the Tennessee Titans, you don't have a lot of these to use, especially when you're already paying your quarterback, you're already paying your running back. You can't miss on these first-round picks.
I mentioned yesterday that the Titans roster, Russ, reminds me a lot of the Bearcats roster in 2018. Why do I say that? Because that was Ridder's first season. And you look at what the Bearcats had that year. They had a bell cow running back in Michael Warren, who I believe had over 300 carries that season. Okay? Look at who the Titans have. They got the best running back in football, and it isn't even close in Derrick Henry. Then I look at the receivers. You got A.J. Brown, who's a bona fide, legitimate number 1 wideout, I think. You got Julio Jones, who maybe isn't the Julio Jones of 2015, but is certainly still a capable wide receiver. Then I look at the defense. Russ, you remember how good the Bearcats defense was in 2018, particularly up front, that defensive line. Okay, look at who the Titans defensive line is. I mean, since Cincinnatians, we know how good that Titans defensive line is. We saw it firsthand in the playoffs. Danico Autry.
Simmons and co.
Yeah, there you go. I don't even need to mention the other players. 9 sacks on Joe Burrow did the talking. Okay, so there's a defense there. There's a head coach who's there. As you mentioned, he's a friend of Luke Fickell's, the best friend of Luke Fickell's at that. So that's why I think, the Steelers, yes, may want to take a quarterback. but maybe playing in Nashville with that team and that head coach, and the fact, Russ, that it's not that far of a drive from Ridder's hometown in Louisville, is that something that factors in here?
I mean, that proximity to hometowns, I don't think that should never factor in. I mean, maybe it is the number or letter H or letter Z tiebreaker. If you're between two players, then you factor in hometowns, but you're going to be getting fired real fast as an NFL evaluator doing that. And to me, it's very hard. It's very hard to make this decision for the Tennessee Titans because of the Ryan Tannehill question. And I already brought up how they're paying him. They will not have Julio Jones if Desmond Ridder does go there this year. He's a free agent. He's not going to be brought back by the Tennessee Titans. So they have A.J. Brown, not a whole lot else receiving wise, but A.J. Brown is a great player at that, and he should be getting extended very soon. When you look at Ryan Tannehill right now, $29 million base salary in 2022. He's a $57.4 million dead cap hit. That goes down to $18.8 million next year. Now, obviously, you never want to eat an $18.8 million dead cap hit, but that's a far cry from something like these other quarterbacks are getting, where Carson Wentz is charging a $40 to $50 million plus dead cap hit to the Eagles last year. And these teams are resetting the record books on dead caps every single year. So I think that is a good spot to look at. And you do have a potential out for positive money gain to cap if you cut Tannehill after 2023. But that's the problem here. And that's the biggest reason why I think it's a fun one to talk about, Alex, but it's really unlikely to happen, because when you're paying Ryan Tannehill $29 million this year and $27 million next year in base salary, it's just very difficult to justify taking a quarterback with a pick this year that you will also be having to have your incumbent quarterback on the roster for not only this year, but next season, 2 prime 4-year window rookie salary type of seasons that you need your quarterback not only starting if you pick that player in the first round, day one, but not looking over their shoulder and not wondering whether or not, if I have a 2-3 game bad stretch, if Mike Vrabel's just going to replace me with Ryan Tannehill. So obviously, if they drafted Desmond Ridder, you'd think they would trade away Ryan Tannehill. But then again, you run into the issue that the Browns have right now. No one is going to take Ryan Tannehill for his current cap hit. So it's the same issue the Browns are having with trying to trade Baker Mayfield. He's making too much money at right around $19 million per year on his 5th-year option. So it's a money problem that will probably keep Desmond Ridder out of the Music City, but a fun hypothetical nonetheless.
So let's circle back to this question. Do you see, whatever team does draft Desmond Ridder, do you see him being a week 1 starter, a starter at any point during his first season?
Yes, day 1 starter, no doubt about it. Like, for example, Marcus Mariota, a guy he compared himself to in Atlanta. I would 1,000% expect him to beat out Marcus Mariota, were Atlanta to do something crazy and take him at I think they picked 8th, or if they were to pick him with their 2nd round pick. And then when you look at the Seahawks, same situation. Drew Lock. Are we really going to be led to believe that Drew Lock is the guy in Seattle? Like, you can't look him with a straight face and say that they are confident in their ability to win football games with Drew Lock. If they go in and don't pick Desmond Ridder if he's there and just roll with Drew Lock, that's telling me that John Schneider is tanking hard for C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young next year. It's the writing on the wall right there. Like, Drew Lock is a unmitigated disaster. It's been obvious for the 3 years he's had extensive time in this starting in the NFL. So same situation there. You would expect Desmond Ridder to go into training camp and beat out a guy like Drew Lock, and you would expect him to beat out a guy like Mitch Trubisky in Pittsburgh or Mason Rudolph there. So I think so. Day 1, if you're drafting Desmond Ridder, you are expecting him to lead your team onto the field in preseason game 1 and regular season game 1 once we get to that point in mid-December. Or mid-September.
We're gonna pause here to hear from a sponsor. When we come back, when we return, though, I'm gonna ask you, Russ, which Bearcat after Ridder and after Sauce Gardner will be the highest impact player in the draft from Cincinnati, and particularly, I'm gonna ask you about Alec Pierce. So we're gonna pause here and hear from a sponsor, and we'll come back with some more questions about a historic weekend in the making for the Bearcats in the NFL draft. Russ Heltman of AllBearcats.com and Sports Illustrated here today on Locked On Bearcats. Happy draft day to all of you out there. It is the beginning of a historic week for the University of Cincinnati. Potentially 9 players from the red and black in Clifton going to hear their names called this weekend. So we know Sauce Gardner's going in the first round. We think Desmond Ridder should be a first-round pick. But what Bearcat, Russ, after Ridder and Gardner, is going to make the highest impact to whichever team he goes to in the NFL?
This is tough. This is a great question here from Alex. I'm going to give him the claps on the rundown for this one. I'm going to have to go with Kobe Bryant here. I'm going to take a mix of experience, a little bit out of left field. I don't know that many people would pick Kobe Bryant in this situation. Positional value and statistics. Kobe Bryant is exiting college football in the top 5 among active players in pass breakups and total interceptions in their career. This guy just makes plays on the football. He described in an interview with Justin Mello of the Draft Network last week how he grew up playing multiple sports. All you Bearcats fans listening out there that are parents, make sure your kids are playing multiple sports. Get rid of the singleizing and going into one sport as long as possible. Do not let them do it, because another perfect example here, Kobe Bryant loved playing baseball growing up, and he said what taught him to track the football in the air was him trekking outfield fly balls. So the fact that he has those ball skills, he has the experience, he has the pedigree, Jim Thorpe Award winner this year, he has the confidence, the leadership value. I think somebody is going to draft Kobe Bryant in the late second, early third round and get a 10-year starter in this league. And a 10-year starter at boundary corner or nickel corner or bump and run press corner is very, very valuable. And the thing about Kobe Bryant is he brings value in all of those facets. He can play every single type of coverage, every single way you can ask from a cornerback. And I do believe he might go. I mean, Sauce Gardner, I think, is a bona fide shutdown corner. He will be, I think, the best player with that wore a UC uniform from this draft class. Could go down as the greatest football player to ever play at UC. But I think right behind him, it's not going to be any wonder why there were not only 2 All-Americans in that secondary, but 2 great draft picks out of that secondary as well.
And it was Kobe Bryant who won the Jim Thorpe Award. I need a clip that you saying that Kobe Bryant is going to be a 10-year starter in this league.
And 10-year NFL player. I don't know about starter, but I think he will play 10 years in this league. I do. I think he has that kind of game.
I mean, and I said Kobe Bryant for my highest impact player. I gave one.
You did. There you go.
One for this is why I have you on every week, because we agree on a lot of points. And I said Kobe Bryant on defense. I went with Alec Pierce on offense. I'm going to ask you a question about him here coming up. But let me ask you this. So there was a Twitter question. This was back in February, and it gave you a list of 18 great NFL defensive players, recent NFL players from this decade, the 2010s, 2000s, 1990s. I think Lawrence Taylor was on there, so go back to the 80s. And it asked you if you could pick 5 players to build your defense, who would you take? And I went with 3 defensive backs over 2 edge rushers, linebackers, because I'm thinking, okay, the NFL is explosive. It's a pass-first league. I want as many playmakers in my secondary as I can have. So Kobe Bryant, you mentioned that he's going to be the highest impact player after Sauce Gardner and Desmond Ridder. So do you think that having an edge rusher or a linebacker who is a playmaker like Darian Beavers, like Myjai Sanders, is more valuable, or is having a defensive back who can make plays like Kobe Bryant, is that more valuable to have in today's NFL?
I'd go with Bryant because of the versatility, and that's where I that's where I pull my tiebreaker out right here, because they're all 3 very good players. And I would say Darian Beavers has as much versatility as Kobe Bryant, but then you pull up the positional value tiebreaker, and linebacker is just never going to be as valuable on the football field as being a shutdown cornerback is. And then when you look at the comparison between Sanders and Kobe Bryant in the vacuum, Sanders is a great impact guy, gets after the quarterback, one of the best pass rush win rates in the entire class coming into the NFL draft, but he doesn't do a whole lot in terms of versatility on all 3 downs. I think Kobe Bryant gives you that versatility where you can tackle well, He can play the slot. He can play outside. He can just be your Swiss Army knife. And there's less of that with Myjai Sanders. It's not because he doesn't defend them well. It's not because of all these motor factors, you would say, in terms of his want to do things. It's just a physics thing. He's 250 pounds. If he was 270, 275, he would be a bona fide 3-down edge rusher, and he would be a first-round pick in this draft alongside Ahmad Gardner. But it's just physically, he wasn't there, and he's also a little bit older than some of these other prospects. So I'm sure if I told Myjai Sanders that to his face, he would scoff at me and say, I can go in there and do it. But there's a reason there are these thresholds and these weight benchmarks and these height benchmarks in the NFL for all these different positions. It matters. Historically, it matters. Historically, it defines whether or not you will be successful and consistent on a 3-down level. And I just don't quite see that yet from Myjai Sanders. I think he could be a 3-down player, but Kobe Bryant is the second and probably the only 3-down player, I would say, on this Bearcats defense that's going into this draft.
Let's go to the
Brian Cook. Brian Cook, I would put there as well. Brian Cook never gets talked about enough. I probably should have brought him up a little bit more. He could take this crown, honestly, Alex. I don't think you and I would be surprised by that, but got to give a shout out to Brian Cook. I do think he could be a great 3-down player as well.
He was incredible. I was watching highlights of the game in Indiana earlier this week, Russ. The interception that he made, I think it was early in the second quarter. I watched it. I'm wondering how in the world did he snag that interception? I mean, it was maybe the most athletic play of the season.
No doubt. Brian Cook is a menace, one of the hardest hitters in this draft, one of the headiest players in this draft, one of the smartest players in this draft. I believe he was right up there, honorable mention for American academic team. So the fact that you get that guy probably in the late third, early fourth, I don't know. I love Kyle Hamilton. I think he's a great player, but there's just no way I'd be spending a pick on Kyle Hamilton in the top 15 when I knew that I could get Brian Cook in the 80s, 90s, and 110s, 80s, 90s, and 100s later on in the draft.
That's interesting. So let's go to the offensive side. Alec Pierce. Here's a guy who we knew who he was in 2018. I mean, I still remember when the Bearcats were going to try to make him a linebacker. Well, good thing they didn't. I mean, that's what Wilson Huber was there for. So Alec Pierce became a wide receiver. We saw his potential in 2019. He had a really good 2020 season, a truncated season. He was also injured that year, missed a few games. Last year, he broke out. He could go across the middle. He could run the deep route. He was a red zone threat. He could high point the ball. And I think Dane Brugler mentioned in his draft guide, one of his weaknesses was a limited route tree. Well, who cares about that if he can make any catch that's thrown to him, Russ? I mean, it feels like to me that he is just he's been drastically rising all throughout this draft process. He had a great combine, great pro day, and now we're talking about him going in the second round at best. I mean, this is quite a rise for a player who has just been doing that all of his time at Cincinnati.
No doubt. And the fact that he's only played, one full season of wide receiver? I saw ESPN Mel Kiper's comparison to him with old Kansas State legend Jordy Nelson. And I think that's a perfect comparison for Alec Pierce. The two tested very similarly. They're this kind of, everybody likes to put the sneaky athletic moniker on the white guy, and it's not sneaky with Alec Pierce. He is a freak. He is arguably the most athletic wide receiver in this class, over a 40-inch vertical, one of the best 40-yard dash times clipped at the NFL Combine, had a top 3 10-yard split among all wide receivers in the 40-yard dash. We all know that the 10-yard split, how fast you can burst off the line of scrimmage and get ahead of cornerbacks down the field, is massively important. The most important factor to being a wide receiver is that burst off the line of scrimmage. So I think a team will be getting a steal with Alec Pierce, and he's a player that when you see guys like Devontae Adams getting $28 million and John Hopkins getting what he gets, Tyreek Hill, $28 million, like upper $20 million for a number one wide receiver when you could wait till the middle of the second round and still get a potential number one guy in Alec Pierce, who is ranked as the 14th best wide receiver in another deep draft class at that position. I just think it's a no-brainer to wait to pay your guys unless they are transcendent talents and playing with transcendent quarterbacks. Like, for example, the Bengals with Jamar Chase. that's the only real situation right now where I would pay a receiver $20+ million. Not even T. Higgins. If T. Higgins wants 22, 24, $25 million next year, see you, T. Pleasure doing business with you. We'll go and get the 14th best receiver right in the second round again, and he'll come in and do exactly what you did 2 years ago when the Bengals selected T. Higgins with the 33rd overall pick. So it's trending that way in the NFL, and I think that's a benefit for Alec Pierce with teams like, for example, the Packers could be sitting there with their second-round pick, needing a wide receiver still, and they could take Jordy Nelson 2.0 for Aaron Rodgers. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Jordy Nelson, but all the breadcrumbs are there, all the testing models are there, and I do think Jordy Nelson, a guy who had, I believe it was a 1,500 or 2,000 yard season at Kansas State. I think it's an 1,800 yard season he had at Kansas State. Owns the single season record for receiving yards in one season at Kansas State because Jordy Nelson was not injured throughout his career and he was not getting shuffled around positions throughout his career at Kansas State. That's the biggest key here, Alex. What you brought up, those important factors of injury and shuffling around the roster have kept a hidden gem quite hidden heading into the draft.
Sometimes you burst onto the scene in the NFL. I mean, think about all the great players that were hidden gems in college. And then they come to the NFL in the late rounds, and the next thing you know, they're these great players. Could you see the Bengals? I mean, you kind of hinted at it, and T. Higgins is going to miss offseason workouts. He had offseason shoulder surgery. I mean, could you see the Bengals, if they're in a position, they take Alec Pierce?
He's going to be right when their pick range there at about they're in the mid-60s for the second round, right around then. So it would be a little shocking to see them pull the trigger on a wide receiver after they've drafted 2 in the first 2 rounds over the past 2 years. And get this, Alex, the Bengals have not drafted a defensive player in the first 2 rounds since Zach Taylor took over at the helm of the Bengals. That's the craziest part. So I think the Bengals will go defense in the opening 2 rounds unless a crazy good player falls to them at either of those spots. But it's a possibility. You could see the Bengals. You could never have enough good wide receivers. They're going to have to pay either Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins coming up, and Alec Pierce can play in the slot, can do a lot of different things at the wide receiver position. So maybe he's one of those guys' replacements. Who knows?
Well, I mean, the Bengals have 2 second-round receivers on their roster right now. T. Higgins, who's really good. Tyler Boyd, who's had a really good career. So, I mean, it'd just be another one on that line if they end up taking Alec Pierce. Just about out of time, Russ, but before we go, I do want to ask you your thoughts on Rob Phinisee committing to Cincinnati, transfer from Indiana. I think this is a good get for the Bearcats on the hardwood. What do you see?
It's a solid ad, but it better come with more. That's what I would say if I were a Bearcats fan. It better come with more. This better not be the ceiling piece for this Bearcats backcourt. You can't be this small and expect to compete with the top teams in the country, or at least Houston next season. We know that juggernaut's going to keep on rolling with Kelvin Sampson. They're bringing in a top 10 recruit in the country next year, a 5-star player. They're starting to get those 5 stars rolling in. You cannot be rolling out 2 6-foot guys on average every single night for the majority of your minutes in that backcourt. I don't care how much of Bulldogs they are, and I'm sure they are. We know David DeJulius is a Bulldog, solid defender. We know Rob Phinisee is a solid defender when he gets consistent minutes. But at 6 feet tall, it's going to be difficult to deal with the taller backcourts in this league. So we'll see if they add another strong, tall guard to this roster to round out the backcourt. But Rob Phinisee brings a ton of great leadership and hopefully brings some great defense that he was able to tap into in his early years in Indiana before falling off once Mike Woodson? Yeah, Mike Woodson came in for the Indiana Hoosiers last year.
It'll be the most playing time that he's gotten in any season this coming season in his college basketball career. Russ, I wish we had more time. It's always great to have you on. It's becoming a weekly thing now here on Locked On Bearcats. So for those of you listening, this may happen again next weekend, especially because the NFL draft is this weekend. So much to get to. I'm looking forward to that. Russ Heltman of AllBearcats.com and Sports Illustrated and WMKV 89.3 in Cincinnati. Russ, thank you, and enjoy the NFL draft this weekend and the University of Cincinnati. 9 players potentially hearing their names called.
You as well, Alex. Fingers crossed for you, Curtis. We got our fingers crossed for you. Mr. Brooks hopefully going off the board in the 7th round.
That's going to be interesting to see. Russ Heltman of AllBearcats.com and Sports Illustrated joins the show today. Thank you for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available everywhere you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Frankie_Natty with 2 N's, NNATI. You can follow me on Instagram, AlexFrank9_, or email me at alex3frank@gmail.com. Enjoy the NFL draft tonight. Potentially 2 Bearcats going to the first round. We know Sauce Gardner's going. Will he be the first corner taken off the board? Where will he go? How high will he go? Will Desmond Ridder go in the first round, and to which team? All of that we're going to find out tonight in the first round of the NFL draft in Las Vegas. Have a great rest of your day. I'm Alex Frank for Locked On Bearcats, and I'll be back tomorrow with a recap of the first round, hopefully talking about 2 Bearcats and where they're headed in the National Football League. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the first round of the NFL draft.